So this is something that I mentioned before. I'm going to go ahead and carry through with it. This is going to be a reading of an account of a firefight that took place in or near Gowardesh, Afghanistan, in 2006. 3 reasons why I'm doing this real quick before I get started. One, this is a story that I think simply deserves to be told. Whatever you think about war, whatever you think about the larger situation in which this event is embedded, I think the human story, at least, deserves to be told. Second, there are some connections, I guess, I have to these events that I don't give it some personal significance. And 3, with respect to wargaming, this event is the heart of Troops in Contact, the rule set that I've been working on and will continue to work on until they're done, whether done is a good product or not. So captured within this event, again, are all of the fundamentals that I'm trying to capture in the simulation game Troops in Contact, with the exception of land vehicles. Okay, let's get started. Again, this is a story that deserves to be told, so I'm reading from, I guess, what you would call an official account, but enough about that. Okay, so the title of this chapter from a collected work is Firefight Above Gowardesh. And this was written by Lieutenant Colonel John C. Mountcastle. And let's get started. In the early evening hours of 21 June 2006, 16 American soldiers from the 3rd Squadron 71st Cavalry, or 371 Cav, of the U.S. Army's 10th Mountain Division engaged in a desperate fight against enemy insurgents high on a mountain ridge overlooking the Gremon Valley in the northeast corner of Afghanistan. So as I read through here, I will be interjecting some commentary, not a lot. I don't expect a lot of commentary, but at this point, real quickly, as by way of background, so I was serving with 10th Mountain Division at this time, and at this time, on this day, I was serving as the executive officer, the XO, the executive officer, to the CJTF 76, that's Combined Joint Task Force 76, CJ3, so basically the operations officer for the Combined Joint Task Force 76 in Afghanistan. All right, continue on. After 30 minutes of intense combat, okay, so after 30 minutes of intense combat, so we have a time reference there, 2 American soldiers were dead, and 1 more was critically wounded. So we have a metric of casualties over time. The enemy element that attacked the U.S. force withdrew after suffering significant casualties. What happened on this ridgeline high above the small village of Gowardesh that evening demonstrated the daunting tactical and operational challenges facing the U.S. Army in the mountainous terrain along the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. These challenges were persistent and would define operations in the region for years to come. The engagement also demonstrated the capability of coalition forces to meet and defeat a well-equipped, trained, and determined enemy on his home terrain. So again, we have a quick snapshot of the type of OPFOR opposing force, well-equipped, trained, and determined. Okay. Continue on. 3 years after the firefight, one of the leaders of the American detachment, Sergeant First Class Jared C. Monty, was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions in the battle, but the heroism and valor he demonstrated during the engagement were showcased by all of the soldiers that fought for one another that evening. I want to interject again real quickly here. Let's see, 3 years later, when I was back in Afghanistan as a company commander, my first sergeant was a new Sergeant First Class Monty very well. And actually, my first sergeant's account is one of the source material is among the source material for this account right here. My first sergeant was interviewed extensively for the record of this action, and and in addition, Sergeant First Class Monty's part in it. Okay. In order to gain a better appreciation for what they endured, this study offers the details of the events leading up to, during, and after the engagement. It also examines a number of important operational and tactical decisions that shaped the events leading up to the insurgent attack on the American kill team from 371 Cav. In doing so, this study illustrates the complex and challenging nature of conducting counterinsurgency in Afghanistan, and in particular the mountainous region of Nuristan and Kunar provinces that serves as the primary corridor to Pakistan for Taliban and other foreign fighters. These are the types of tactical and operational challenges American soldiers can well expect to encounter in the near future. Background. In April of 2006, Combined Joint Task Force 76, or CJTF 76, under the leadership of the 10th Mountain Division, initiated Operation Mountain Lion in eastern Afghanistan, aimed at defeating insurgent operations and establishing coalition control in the region. Let me interject again here. Part of this background, again, the source material for this background material right here, okay, among the source material, actually I think it's primary to the source material for this background right here is an article written by my boss at the time, the CJ3 for CJTF 76. A key aspect of the operation was the utilization of a clear hold build engage approach, which a former G3 of the 10th Mountain Division referred to, and this is my boss, by the way, referred to as a, quote, score of 4 essential parts, end quote. As a part of a counterinsurgency effort, the clear step focused on using lethal military operations to clear targeted areas of any enemy presence or control. The next step of hold entailed creating a lasting security by establishing coalition presence in the cleared area. The last two parts of the approach of build and engage centered on improving infrastructure and facilities for local communities and establishing a working relationship with the people based on communication and a shared trust. With Operation Mountain Lion, CJTF 76 planners hoped to defeat the resurgent Taliban and other enemies of the fledgling government of Afghanistan that had recently increased their attacks in the provinces of Kunar and Nuristan. In the months that followed, CJTF 76 forces, which included the 3rd Infantry Brigade Combat Team from the 3rd Mountain Division, 3 BCT is the unit that I wound up serving in 3 years later, back in Afghanistan in another province. Okay, where was I? Pushed into a number of suspected enemy strongholds, establishing contact with the local civilians and building combat outposts to sustain the coalition's gains. The most notable of these was the establishment of the Korangal outpost in the heavily contested Korangal Valley in early May. Fighting with the insurgents was intermittent, as most of the enemy chose to avoid the clearing operations and wait for the coalition forces to return to their bases. By June 2006, the majority of effort for what remained of Operation Mountain Lion was focused on the hold portion of the operation, with the transition to build and engage just beginning. In the latter phases, the Provincial Reconstruction Teams, or PRTs, organizations composed of both military and civilian officials dedicated to assisting the local population with building new infrastructure and establishing a new government, would take the lead. However, the security situation in northeast Afghanistan was still unstable. To facilitate the transition to the next phase, the 3rd Squadron, 71st Cavalry Regiment, 371 Cav, of the 3rd BCT 10th Mountain Division, operating out of the newly established Forward Operating Base, or FOB Nare, established new checkpoints and outposts in the northeastern tip of Afghanistan once Mountain Lion officially ended on 15 May 2006. Fob Nureh was the northernmost U.S. outpost in Afghanistan at the time, and according to one account, Nureh district was, quote, a clutch of mud brick and stone villages inhabited by 30,000 Pashtun tribespeople, end quote, who had not seen outsiders since the Soviet army departed the region in 1989. In 2006, 371 Cav became known as Task Force Titan, after the squadron added key attachments to its organic force of 4 company-sized maneuver elements. The task force's mission was to secure the major population centers in Nuristan and Kunar by clearing areas suspected of harboring insurgents and targeting insurgent infiltration routes into the region. In June 2006, CJTF 76 planned to launch a new operation named Mountain Thrust, which aimed to eliminate remaining centers of enemy activity across northeastern Afghanistan. The CJTF assigned Task Force Titan the mission of separating what was left of the enemy in southeastern Nuristan province from the local population and preventing further enemy infiltration into the region from Pakistan. The task force operation, known as Gowardesh Thrust, became CJTF 76's main effort. For Operation Gowardesh Thrust, Task Force Titan planned to execute an operation to clear the Kremen Valley, also known as the Gowardesh Valley. Gowardesh Thrust would feature 2 company-sized units moving into the valley using both ground maneuver and air assault. Before launching the operation, however, the task force needed to establish surveillance on target areas and named areas of interest, or NAIs. Locations in the valley where the Task Force Titan staff believed activity would reveal insurgent organization and intent. During Operation Mountain Lion, the squadron leadership developed a new and somewhat unorthodox platoon-sized unit just for this type of reconnaissance and observation mission. The squadron combined a Combat Observation and Lasing Team, or COLT team, section with its sniper section to create a 16-man formation that would have enhanced observation, fire direction, and security capabilities. So I'll interject here. So in game terms, we have something like a 4-unit organization, 4-man or 4-soldier organization here. Okay. This unique formation, which became known to the soldiers of 371 Cav as a kill team, was described by the squadron operations officer, the S3, as a tactically flexible unit that could maximize the capabilities of the squadron and defend itself against enemy attack. Again, I want to interject just a note that I remember this 371 Cav S3 coming to the CJTF headquarters a couple of times to brief my boss, the CJ3, on different operations. All right, pick up again. The kill team was comprised of 16 handpicked soldiers and NCOs who were, in the S3's words, the most skilled, the best of the organization. The kill team for Gowardesh Thrust was placed under the leadership of 2 non-commissioned officers, Staff Sergeant Christopher Cunningham, who oversaw the sniper section, and Staff Sergeant Jared Monty, a section leader from the squadron's Colt platoon. Cunningham and Monty were charged with establishing an observation post, or OP, close to the top of Mountain 2610, which made up the western wall of the Kremen Valley. From this position, they were to observe a number of NAIs and to assist in directing artillery fires and close air support for the task force as it conducted its move into the valley. In addition, the kill team was supposed to watch for quote-unquote scorers, a term for insurgents attempting to flee the valley, and engage them as targets of opportunity. In all, the mission was not overly complex. It was to climb the mountain, establish the OP, monitor the action below, and call for fires if necessary. 21 June 2006 was the planned date for Gowardesh Thrust's main effort movement into the valley. The kill team would begin its move on 18 June, infiltrating by climbing up to their planned observation post on the ridgeline, which was located just 3 miles northwest of the village of Gowardesh. On the eve of the operation, the enemy situation in the vicinity of the Kremen Valley was largely unknown to the task force. The 371 Cav staff utilized what limited information on the enemy it could gather based on interviews with U.S. Special Forces detachments that had operated in the region previously and interviews with the local population. Being the first battalion-sized American element to establish a presence in the area, the squadron had no existing pattern of analysis for the enemy. According to Captain Ross Burkoff, the squadron's intelligence officer, or S2, the historical data necessary for charting trends in enemy response time, organizational capabilities, aggressiveness, and marksmanship was simply not available. Therefore, it was uncertain what kind of opposition Task Force Titan elements, including the kill team, would face as they pushed into the Grumman Valley. Based on what little information was available, Captain Burkoff determined that the enemy's most likely course of action would be to simply observe the Americans, to include the kill team. An organized enemy attack on the kill team was deemed the most dangerous course of action, but was seen as much less likely. The squadron staff planned for the kill team to have indirect fire support from 105mm howitzers and 120mm mortars during their climb and while in position, and anticipated that this would be sufficient to counter any unexpected engagement with the enemy. So there we have some, to interject, there we have some off-map indirect fire assets. As long as the staff's assessment of enemy intent was correct, the kill team had the right size, composition, and fire support to make the mission a success. As one of the members of the squadron's battle staff later claimed, from the aspect of planning and not knowing, based on the intel that we had, that was the best plan we could come up with. Although the staff did not know it at the time, this plan would soon face a significant test. Burdened with double the normal combat load, which included just enough food and water for the 3-day infiltration up the mountain, the 16 soldiers were trucked from Fab-Nere near the village of Kamu to a task force mortar position near the Gowardesh Bridge, located just south of the Grumman Valley. Each team member carried more than 50 pounds of equipment with them, not including their personal weapon. Right here, by the way, we have some references to combat loads that will be an important aspect of troops in contact. Okay, early on the morning of 18 May, the team began its walk up the ridgeline toward Mountain 2610. The soldiers knew that they had 3 days to get into position. They did not know, however, exactly what awaited them up on the mountain. For Staff Sergeant Cunningham, the mission was clear, but the prospects for success were uncertain. Something didn't feel right about it, he said later. The infiltration plan did not worry him. Cunningham was instead slightly apprehensive about the plan to extract the team once the mission was complete. "I don't like going into a place where I don't have a way out," he said later, "and I don't like having to come out the way I came in." End quote. 2 courses of action have been developed for the kill team's extraction. The first entailed airlifting the team out once a landing zone, or LZ, was created on the ridgeline by advancing Task Force Titan elements during Gowardesh thrust. The second course of action involved the team walking down the mountain using a different route, one that ran directly into the village of Gowardesh. Both of these courses of action were contingent on Task Force Titan's movement into the valley going according to plan. All Cunningham and the other members of the kill team could do was hope that it did. The climb. The kill team's ascent over the next 3 days was typical of the difficult ground maneuver in northeastern Afghanistan. Navigating the steep rocky terrain while carrying a combat load and enough provisions for 72 hours was challenging enough, but the rapid increase in altitude only added to the difficulty and prevented the team from moving quickly. The squadron's actions during Operation Mountain Lion had introduced the soldiers to the challenges offered by the mountainous terrain, so the physical trials came as no surprise. This familiarity, however, did not make the task any less demanding for the kill team. Indeed, in compiling their end-of-tour after-action review, the soldiers of the 3rd Brigade emphasized the severe effects of the physical environment on their operations. Quote, "The entire Kunar Nuristan experience was impacted by terrain and weather. Heat injuries occurred due to the weight of full kit and foot movement over rugged terrain. We were also affected by cold weather or exposure injury due to operations in a mountainous environment. If it wasn't the heat, it was the mountains. If it wasn't the mountains, it was the cold and or rain and snow." End quote. The AR did not exaggerate. The terrain was so treacherous that the brigade suffered significant soldier injuries and even deaths from falls in mountains. Seeing fellow soldiers die as a result of the terrain was not likely something the unit anticipated when it prepared for its deployment to Afghanistan. In an effort to negate the effects of the early summer heat, the kill team made frequent stops on their climb up the ridgeline of Mountain 2610 and moved during the night as much as possible. They took both short and long halts, taking time to observe the valley below and keep a watch for the enemy in the area. During a number of these halts, the kill team began to detect a significant amount of movement in the valley. Quote, "We observed a bunch of guys going up and down, huge groups of guys," end quote. Staff Sergeant Cunningham recalled, "Things just didn't seem normal. All of these people are moving into and out of the valley." They reported these findings to the task force headquarters over the radio and continued their climb. When they finally arrived at their planned position on the ridgeline, it was after dark on the night of 20 June. Even with the lack of light, it was clear to them that they were not the first people to occupy that spot. Evidence of heavy foot traffic, perhaps recent, marked the site. To the east, what appeared to be a wide, well-used footpath ran along the ridge and dipped down toward the valley below. "This ain't good," Cunningham remembered thinking. The task of remaining undetected suddenly seemed much more challenging. The team radioed back their findings again and prepared to establish a perimeter. Despite the evidence of foot traffic, the position they now held was suited to accomplishing the mission. They were perched atop a bump in the ridgeline, with relatively flat ground immediately around them, with a number of trees and rocks for cover and concealment. To the east, they had a good view of the Grumman Valley, to include a number of the Operation NAIs. One of these was the suspected residence of a well-known insurgent leader, Haji Usman, who was high on the task force target list. The position of the patrol base was such that the portion of the valley directly below was difficult to observe as it stretched further to the north. The kill team could identify suspected insurgent trail networks. For the observation requirements set forth in the task force mission, the kill team was where it needed to be. According to an official Army account of the engagement, the position the patrol now occupied was in a known enemy sanctuary and near the Urstan Pass, a major trafficking route used to smuggle foreign fighters, weapons, IED-making materials, and other supplies into the region from Pakistan. If the task force sweep during Gowardesh thrust caused any movement in the valley, the team would likely see that movement from where its soldiers were now standing. Directly above the team's position, the mountain ridge continued its upward slope to the north, and a group of large rocks with a small clearing beyond made up the southern boundary of the position. On either side of the ridge, the ground dropped off at a sharp angle. As such, the kill team was faced with the typical tactical constraint of ridge lines such as that if they needed, they could only maneuver in two directions, up the ridge to the north or back down to the south. While not an ideal situation, the terrain offered no viable alternative. As most U.S. soldiers conducting operations in Kunar and Nuristan would learn, the terrain was seldom, if ever, ideal. Perhaps thankfully, the kill team's time in this position was supposed to be short. The original plan for the 16 Americans now taking up positions in the dark was for them to begin their overwatch within the next hours. As a result, they did not immediately begin to prepare deliberate fighting positions or conduct other preparations associated with a lengthy static defensive position. Another factor contributing to their actions that evening was physical exhaustion. The 3-day climb in temperatures often in excess of 100 degrees had taken its toll, and most of the soldiers were almost out of food and water. For the remainder of the night, the team recovered from the movement up the ridgeline and kept watch on the NAIs in the valley below. Before daybreak on 21 June, the kill team received the news that Operation Gowardesh Thrust was on a 3-day hold. Task Force Titan would not be entering the Grumman Valley that day. The night before, a convoy from Charlie Company had suffered an IED attack while traveling to a meeting with local officials at a border crossing. A number of soldiers were wounded, and the vehicle sustained significant damage. The attack immediately raised questions about the security of the main route of advance into the Grumman Valley. The 371 Cav leadership decided to delay the operation in order to conduct route clearance and to inspect the counter-IED equipment on all of the squadron's vehicles. When Staff Sergeant Cunningham learned of the delay, he remembered thinking to himself, "That is not good." Indeed, it left the team in an uncertain position. Most of the soldiers were in significant need of food and water, and what little they had left would not last another 24 hours. Originally, the squadron planned to deliver an aerial resupply package to the kill team in conjunction with the air assault into the valley scheduled for 21 June, with the assumption that the amount of air activity over the area would mask a single UH-60 dropping off supplies to the team. Now a separate aerial resupply would have to be conducted during the day, which would more likely alert the enemy to the team's location. Perhaps more importantly, the 16 Americans would need to find a way to remain undetected by the enemy for 3 days. During Operation Anaconda in March 2002, U.S. Special Operations Forces were deployed in a similar fashion to provide overwatch of the Shahakat Valley in Afghanistan. Those teams, however, were smaller, highly trained, and well equipped for such a mission. Even with their training, Special Operations observation teams were sometimes discovered by insurgent enemies, as was the case with a 4-man SEAL team during Operation Red Wings in Kunar province almost a year prior. Once discovered by a group of local Afghan goat herders, the SEAL team decided to release them rather than hold them captive or kill them. Less than 2 hours later, the team was attacked by a large force of Taliban fighters, and all but one of the SEALs were killed. There was no question in the mind of the surviving team member that the Taliban fighters had been informed of their presence by the goat herders. The soldiers within the Task Force Titan kill team on Mountain 2610 were not Special Operations soldiers, nor were they well equipped for an extended stay in the mountains. These facts were not lost on the members of the team, and according to at least one report, several of the soldiers had gut feelings that something wasn't right. Nevertheless, the word came from Fob Nare that the team was to remain in position. The task force staff reached this decision after considering the fact that the kill team had immediate fire support available from the 105mm howitzers and 120mm mortars in case of an enemy engagement. Another critical factor was the larger operational schedule. Gowardesh thrust was imminent, and there was not enough time to pull the team off the mountain, only for it to turn around immediately and hike up the mountain again. Given these considerations, the staff was pretty comfortable with the decision to leave the kill team in place. It was the first of 3 important decisions that would impact the kill team that day. By 0800 on 21 June, it was clear to the members of the kill team and to Task Force Titan staff that the team needed resupply of food and water that day. Although the resupply posed an increased risk of enemy detection, the team's critical need for water was deemed paramount, and the task force's leadership felt it had little choice but to conduct the resupply as soon as possible. This was the second important decision that day. The planned delivery point for the aerial resupply was several hundred meters to the northwest of the patrol base. When the kill team received word that a UH-60 was inbound with resupply, the team leaders split up the group of 16, taking the majority of them to the resupply landing zone to provide security and carry the water and food back to the patrol base. The remainder of the team stayed at the patrol base and watched the valley. At approximately 13:30 hours, a single UH-60 flew in low over the Gremon Valley, directly over one of the suspected enemy structures that the kill team was monitoring. Cunningham could barely believe it. "This pilot, he didn't talk to me, he just came around, right over the bad guy's house," he recalled. "He flew right to me, stopped right above me, and dropped the stuff." The squadron staff had initially planned for the resupply UH-60 to approach Mountain 2610 from a different azimuth and to fly over the delivery point and drop the resupply bags without stopping. This would make it more difficult for any enemy watching to pinpoint the kill team's whereabouts. That didn't happen, the Squadron Fire Support NCOIC later noted. The aircraft hovered over them, which we think gave away their positions. We were still upset about that. Once the helicopter deposited the large white bags of food and water, it departed for Fob Nare. The weather on the ridge was clear, permitting full view of the UH-60 from the ridgeline above and the valley below. The drop had actually occurred very close to the kill team's patrol base rather than at the designated LZ. This fact made a number of the soldiers uneasy. The soldiers at the drop point gathered the food and water bags and began moving them the short distance back to the base. Meanwhile, Specialist Max Noble, who was pulling security at the team observation point, identified what appeared to be an Afghan male watching the resupply operation through a pair of binoculars. The man was located approximately 1,500 meters to the east in the valley and was intently observing the Americans' location. I'll interject right here in game terms. Right here we have another metric for observation in both distance, terrain, and activity. Minutes later, the majority of the team arrived back at the patrol base with the resupply. Specialist Noble, the team medic, alerted Staff Sergeant Cunningham to the observer in the valley. Both Cunningham and Monty watched the man for several minutes as he continued to observe their position on the ridgeline and then disappeared. He was clearly looking at us, Cunningham recalled. Although there was the unlikely chance that the local man was not a threat, one thing that seemed clear to the soldiers on the ridge was that the kill team's position had been compromised. The fight. Monty and Cunningham now faced a tough tactical decision of whether to move or stay in position. The dilemma was strikingly similar to that of the SEAL team during Operation Red Wings. Yeah. I'll go ahead and break here and pick up in another video.